Welcome to the African News Review podcast, where we cut through the noise and get to the truth. I am your host, Adesoji Iginla, and each week we are here to challenge the biases, prejudices, and misinformation in the Western press about Africa. Using historical context and contemporary insights, we set the record straight and reclaim the narrative. Tune in every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we uncover the real stories and reshape the conversations about Africa. This is the African News Review podcast, reclaiming Africa's narrative, one story at a time. Yes, greetings, and welcome to another episode of African News Review, the story where we look at Africa's depiction in the Western press and sort of reframe the narrative as it were. With me, as usual, I'm joined by Sister Fubara Eneli Esquire, host Rethinking Freedom, co-host Women in Resistance, and co-host of Grill and Books.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. The Comrade is our renowned legend, is Black Star News, presenter on WBAI, which you can catch every Tuesday at 3 p.m. African hour. You know, it's a staple for Radio New York. So if you're ever in town and online, you can also catch the WBAI staple. Welcome, Comrade.
Asante-san. Thank you, Comrade.
Yes, I am your host, Adesoji Iginla. As you can see my name on the screen. And without further ado, let's go into today's stories. But before we do, let's do the normal protocol. News where you're at, beginning with Sister. Local news and that you might want to share with us.
Yeah, well, in our area, local elections are heating up. We have mayoral races and school board races and city council races. In some areas, district judges, and it's really important that people are tuned in and that if you have a candidate that you would like to see in office, that you support them. They need us to show up to vote, but they also need resources to get the word out about their candidacy. Whether it's $5 or $10, if you are saying you want to see change and you are not supporting any candidate, you are just talking. And just posting on social media is not enough. Of course, we can amplify their messages on social media, but truly, candidates need support in terms of finance. They need volunteers to go door to door to make phone calls. So stop just complaining and actually start taking action. That's what I'm going to focus on in terms of what's happening in my neck of the woods, as they would say.
I think you've left out one bit of news.
What bit of news is that?
Well, little birdie told us that you were given a new pair of wings in your local chapter. You want to share with us, or do we have to let it go?
Well, our NAACP was celebrating its first year in existence locally, and they gave me their Race and Justice Award at the banquet that was just held on Friday. And while I'm appreciative of it, don't really quite feel like I have lived up to being able to earn that when you look at the giants that have come before us and the work that needs to be done. And of course, as I got up on the stage to receive the award, the words of Fannie Luhema, whom we covered in Women in Resistance, were ringing in my ear because she described the NAACP not as the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, but as the National Association for the Advancement of Certain People. And that is something that we need to be very aware of, that sometimes we're blinded by our own privileges, even those of us who are within, quote unquote, an oppressed class. And it's really important to make sure that you are out in your community and you are serving the needs of all members of your community, not just the ones you feel comfortable with. But yes,
That's
and my
very
gratitude to our killing chapter of the NAACP for the honor. All it says to me is I have more work to do.
It's good because it inspires other young ladies also.
Yeah. So, without Comrade, news where you at, please?
Well, I would say the national news, of course, the peace negotiations.
I thought you were going to say Melania trying to come out ahead of some
That's supposed to
bombshell
be
news,
my
but
news.
no, let's focus on what's important.
Yeah, absolutely. Although that one is going to turn out to be big too. So I'm hoping. So J.D. Vance left, and he said they had constructive discussions, but they did not come to an agreement. So I'm hoping this was just bluster. That, of course, I did expect him to announce an agreement without coming back and consulting his boss, which is something that could not be done over the phone. So I'm hoping that is that. Obviously, the U.S. is giving the impression that it's not bowing, so it's sending ships into the region. Iran is sending troops to the location close to the strait, but that does not mean things are not going in the right direction, because in diplomacy, that's often what happens. They give out the opposite signals when things could be going in a better direction, because at the end of the day, I don't think anyone wants to see oil going back at $110 a barrel as they get closer to the midterm elections, regardless of what Trump may privately want. I think the bigger forces, which is the economy and which is the midterm election. If it's true that at the end of the day he decides what Netanyahu wants to be done, then obviously the Republicans will pay a very steep political price for it going into the midterms. Regarding Melania coming ahead with her denials unprompted, that means that a huge tidal wave is heading our way. And we should be hearing more on that issue in the next coming days or weeks. And you're right, sister, it's going to become very, very big. Otherwise, she would not have made that supposedly unsolicited press statement.
That was nonetheless filled with very easily rebuttable lies. But yeah. But I think that as we look at the quote unquote peace negotiations that are taking place in Iran, that I hope that African leaders are paying attention to how this regime functions and really how the West functions. And so the idea that, which they've done it before, we know, but the idea that you're supposedly in good faith, that's a term that we use in the legal world, in good faith negotiating, but then at the same time, you are conducting hostile actions, bringing your tankers or ships or whatever. It's this idea of a bully and just never being able to see other human lives on the same par as your life. So for you, any form of equality feels like oppression. If you're not the one dictating everything, then it's not fair. And so African leaders really need to pay attention when they're signing these deals and shaking hands and really understanding what what United States of America in particular, but the West as a whole is about, has always been about, and making sure that they are not falling for the okie doke, as you will.
And while we're at it, let me just add one other thing. Let me add one other thing very quickly, because a lot of people have been contacting me about it. This whole notion of, kissing the rear end of the United States by the Ugandan regime. Many of you may have heard, listeners and viewers, that General Muhoozi, who is the commander of Uganda's army and is the son of the senior dictator, General Museveni, has been tweeting that Uganda is willing to send 100,000 soldiers to Israel to fight on behalf of Israel against Iran. This is a desperate regime that is trying to buy legitimacy and trying to divert the news from the fact that it stole elections from Bobi Wine on January 15. The regime was widely denounced by the EU countries. The United States has basically ignored it. So it's hoping that by brown nosing, it can get on the good sides of the United States and of Israel as well. And people should not forget that when Donald Trump referred to Africa as the S-hole countries, Yoweri Museveni said, "I love Donald Trump." And then finally, just to show you how perverted mindset these two are, the father and son, General Museveni once told Atlantic Monthly magazine that I've never blamed the whites for colonizing Africa. I've never blamed the whites for taking slaves. If you are stupid, you should be taken as a slave. So that should put in context the type of so-called leadership we have in Uganda. So there's no need to send me any more questions about what is going on in Uganda. I just explained the context to everybody.
We don't have any stories re-Uganda this week, but to go along with the line of quote unquote slave catching, let's go to The Guardian for our news from The Guardian, which reads, and it reads, Commonwealth leaders vow to keep seeking reparations after Reform UK plan to halt visas. Politicians won party pledge to punish countries seeking justice for slavery will harm and isolate. Seeking justice for slavery will harm and isolate Britain. So everybody knows who he is. That's Farage, and that's the gentleman who made that statement, Zia Yusuf. And the lead reads, Commonwealth politicians said they will not back down from seeking reparation as UK public figures, including former Reform insider, won the right-wing party pledge to punish countries seeking justice for slavery will harm and isolate Britain. This week, Reform UK said they will halt visas for nationals formerly demanding reparations from Britain if they took power. And, okay, so Zia Yusuf's take is, Reform's Home Affairs spokesman said on Monday the UK was being ridiculed on the world stage. While countries like Jamaica, Nigeria, and Ghana ramp up their demands for reparation, the Westminster establishment has rewarded them. Enough is enough, he said. Zia, who is from Sri Lanka, is among the which Sri Lanka is also among the countries seeking colonial redress from the UK. So, on the face of it, what's your take? Let's start with the Comrade.
Okay. So since we recently discussed, actually this whole issue after Ghana brought that motion to the United Nations, I won't keep my comments long. Just a few points. Obviously, they're adopting the U.S. policy, which is to some extent already getting some backlash here in the United States. You notice they're adjusting a little bit because they're concerned about the midterm. Britain benefits a lot more from those former colonies, those former enslaved people in their country. So obviously, you would hope that if they ever come into power and Britain implements those policies, that these countries would retaliate as well. And Britain would actually end up being the bigger loser. They're much more dependent on these countries than people realize in terms of their resources for their industry. And then I just want to correct one thing that even Antoinette Fernandez of the Green Party said, and the Green Party is supposed to be progressive, that slavery was abolished by the British because of the slave uprisings by enslaved people. That is 100% incorrect. Obviously, they did not like the uprisings, but that was not the real reason why slavery was abolished. And they need to read Eric Williams, particularly the so-called progressives. If the progressives don't know, capitalism and slavery, he explains it very clearly that yes, Wilberforce and all those people, their work was welcome, but it was the industrial capitalists who were actually determining force in abolishing slavery. Because they said, we need these people to be exploited in our factories, not on some plantation growing cotton and tobacco and bananas and stuff like that, sugarcane. No, that is old school exploitation. We want them in industrial factories. And that's why slavery was abolished. And of course, slavery has not ended. What has happened is now it has a new form. When people talk about trade does not involve a single African country. Trade, if you really want to see trade, go to the souks, the markets in African countries. You cannot exploit the women who lead those markets, right? They bargain. No, it's true, because they know the value of each merchandise. They know what they're willing to exchange in return for some other merchandise. And that's where you really have the market system operating at its best. People negotiating and bargaining. Does a single African country negotiate and bargain with the industrialized countries, whether it's the West or China? The answer is no. So there's not a single African country today engaging in trade with the West or with China. All of them are being exploited. And that is the modern form of slavery. And then one more comment. No, actually two. Yusuf, the spokesperson. First of all, reform does not even, they don't even consider him British, you see? So if Yusuf wants to understand his personality better, regardless of what he sees in the mirror, I strongly recommend for him Black Skin, White Mask. Then he will understand who he really is. And then the final comment is...
That's 2 books now.
Right. The final comment is to the person that said, the same Yusuf, enough is enough. Nobody dares say that to Israel or to Netanyahu. Okay? You can only say that to Africans because you know they will not retaliate, or they have not been retaliating so far. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Sister.
There's actually a quote by Bel Ribeiro Addy, the Labour MP and chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on African Reparations and Reform that really captures a lot of what I was thinking. She said, or he said, not sure what their gender is. I was thinking it was a she. She said, let me go back to that this was a ridiculous provocation, adding that reparatory justice was never simply about money, and that the demand is for acknowledgement, truth-telling, and structural repair. And I can hear Mia Motley in my ear right now. She goes on to say, reform have either failed to grasp that or chosen to ignore it. We understand that they've chosen to ignore it. What they're effectively doing is threatening the descendants of the enslaved for insisting the transatlantic slave trade be recognized as a crime against humanity. Some still believe they sit at the head of a table the rest of the world was never invited to. The world is changing. And I think that's what the genocidal murderer Netanyahu is finding out in the Middle East. That's certainly what the Trump regime is finding out. I hope it doesn't cost too many families the lives of their loved ones. Like Davis went on to say, the total death toll of slavery may exceed 20 million. That's the death toll. We're not talking about the trauma and the devastation on those who survived on this side of the Atlantic and those who survived on the other side of the Atlantic, because we know that we should know that these kind of catastrophic events rip apart a community. They change the trajectory of what that community is able to do. We will actually never know what Africa could have been had we not been so brutally interrupted in our own development. But he goes on to say, we confront that history honestly, not as an act of self-flagellation, but because the alternative, the insistence that power never has to account for itself, is exactly the logic that makes atrocities possible in every generation. And I really wanted to highlight that because it's so easy to read these articles and it's just words and we forget the human toll. And it's so easy to read these articles and read them in isolation and not connect them to things that are continuing to go on. So we have seen the genocide of the Palestinians that is actually ongoing. There is a genocide taking place in the Sudan that is actually ongoing. There's a genocide now happening in Lebanon that is actually ongoing. And we can name many other hotspots, so to speak, across the globe. And the reason why they can continue, and many of us just go through our daily lives and never a thought as to what it feels like to see missiles flying overhead, or for those of you like me who have children in college, all of a sudden getting the news that their entire university has been
shut down.
Yeah, in the words of Trump, obliterated. And then the question is, and then where are your kids? And then, the idea that you want to stop people from being able to develop. And then when you've done these things that you're not proud of because you want to hide them, And then people bring them to the forefront and say, just apologize.
Right.
With your hubris, that is too much. And we're going to go a step further. Not only are we not going to apologize, we're going to continue the tactics of extracting and exploiting, and we're going to now punish you for having the audacity, the nerve, the temerity to speak up and say what we're doing is wrong. But you know what? The world is changing, and every civilization we have seen through history has an end. These guys are holding on, they're holding on, and unfortunately, too many of us are still accomplices in helping to elongate their time and power. But change is coming. The world is changing.
Okay, so let me add to that.
Thank you.
Let me add to that. Just one. So, the sister mentioned the victims, 20 million estimated according to the Labour politician. The victims, particularly on the African continent, could actually reach as high as 100 million. There's a chapter in Rodney's How Europe Developed Africa, where he mentions that there was a certain century, and I forget which century now, where Africa was the only continent where the population did not increase for one whole century, and during the era of enslavement. I just wanted to add that. Go ahead, back to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So for our next story, we'll go to Burkina Faso. It's coming from the Al Jazeera network. It's that Burkina Faso head Ibrahim Traore says, forget democracy. One will probably be quick to jump at that headline and say, what is he talking about? Traore reneges on promises to hold election and has since scrapped political parties in the country. It reads, Burkina Faso's leader, Ibrahim Traore, says the people need to forget about democracy. Just 3 months after his government dissolved all political parties in the West African nation. Speaking to journalists in a lengthy interview on state television on Thursday, Traore referenced Libya as an example of a country where he said outsiders attempted to impose democracy but failed. And people need to forget about the issue of democracy, he said. We have to tell the truth. Democracy isn't for us. Democracy kills, Traore says, according to French broadcaster RFI. Look at Libya. It's a prime example right next to us. Everywhere they try to establish democracy in the world, it's done with bloodshed. Democracy is slavery. Comrade, your take. Just taking a quick break here on the African News Review podcast, but don't go anywhere. If you're enjoying our deep dive into the real stories behind the headlines, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern, we're here to debunk the myths and bring you the truth about Africa. Want to help spread the word? Share this podcast with your friends and leave us a review. It goes a long way in helping others discover the real Africa. Without further ado, let's get back to setting the record straight.
Okay, so, I'm hoping, of course, that he meant Westminster democracy or U.S.-type
democracy, yeah.
U.S.-type democracy. And those absolutely don't belong in Africa. And that's why Africa has been groping in darkness since so-called independence in the 1960s, because they have not adapted Africans. In fact, African, as we all know, societies are sometimes too democratic. Issues are debated, discussed, because traditionally, historically, they had to come to a consensus. And then people would agree, even the ones that did not take that particular position, say, okay, we've arrived at a consensus. So let's take this decision and move forward. That is something that Africans did not learn from Europeans. In fact, many European countries came much later when African states had already existed. So this notion that we are learning democracy from them is very retarded. In fact, democracy regressed in Africa because of enslavement and because of colonialism, when they came and imposed their institutions that destroyed indigenous African institutions. So I'm hoping that's what he meant. And there's a strong argument for that we need to, in fact, integrate systems that work for us. We have a disconnect. Somebody's elected to parliament. In fact, Anta Job wrote about this. Why should somebody be fluent in French to be elected to parliament in Senegal? If the person is wise, intelligent, the person is respected by his community, he's going to be denied to represent them in parliament because he doesn't speak fluent French, like it's spoken in Paris. That's nonsense. That's just one example. But the biggest example is the disconnect. They come to the capital cities. They're in these marvelous buildings as legislators. There's no organic connection with them and the people in the rural Africa. So you're telling me that by just informing a political party, by holding regular elections, that translates to democracy? Of course, the answer is no. So I'm hoping that is what he meant. That's very legitimate, and those are the issues that need to be addressed. But the biggest missing thing in this story, maybe I'll just point out two. One is that Burkina Faso, in addition to Mali and Niger, the alliance of Sahel states that throughout the French, are fighting jihadists. But this has not improved. Now, in fact, it's getting worse, as if it was getting any better before they threw out the French. But the French had 5,000 soldiers there. It was not making significant impact. But the biggest glaring omission in this article, it claims that he's widely appreciated by the African diaspora because of his anti-Western rhetoric. That is 100,000% nonsense. That's not what he's appreciated. He's appreciated because he's taking control of the economy. That's not even mentioned even once, not even one sentence. He took control of resources. He says we need to get a fair price for this. We want it to be processed within our countries, and we want to start building factories in our countries. And Africans know that is the key to liberation. That's why he's appreciated. They could care less that he's in uniform. If he had been a man in suit and tie, making the same argument and actually executing the policies that he's executing, of course, Africans would support that person as well.
Sister?
So a number of things that I wanted to point out with that article. First of all, is like Comrade was saying, is us even just defining what it is we mean by democracy. I know growing up, we were taught to recite this over and over again. Democracy, government of the people, for the people, by the people. And if we go by that definition, I am not certain that too many countries, actually, I'm fairly certain that they're trying to think of anyone that will actually exactly fit that. There might be a
Very
couple.
good.
Certainly not here in the United States of America.
Absolutely
because
not.
when you think of people for the people, by the people, you're talking about the government's power coming from the consent of the people. Well, how many people are consenting to their health care being dismantled here in the United States, or unlivable wages, or just the oligarchs getting tax breaks while everybody else gets to suffer? And so, like Comrade was saying, there's a definition of democracy that they put forth and that supposedly has been introduced to Africa, but that does not actually reflect the truth of how democracies, those that claim that they're democracies, are actually functioning across the world. And certainly when you look at the continent of Africa, let me use Nigeria as an example. During the last Nigerian presidential election, why were all of the presidential candidates, going to London to present what their policies would be should they be elected to basically the UK government? What does that so in Africa, by and large, even in the places where we have elections, it is not really the will of the people. The people are not choosing who their representatives are. They are merely puppets, in most cases, of colonial entities that want to make sure that they have the right middleman, middlewoman in place to continue to exploit us. That is why they have killed every single one of our leaders who were actually concerned about us, either killed them or, coups, or they've done other things to undermine their ability to succeed. And so in this article, they're also talking about how many more people supposedly have been killed in Burkina Faso since this year, under quote unquote Traore's leadership. what it doesn't get into is who is doing the killing and why. Because it's a tale as old as time to go in and foment
Trouble.
conflict and to have people fighting against each other. And where are they getting all these guns and these weapons? Now we can say these are all mineral, this is a mineral rich country. Yes, but who's buying it then? And then being able to supply the junta and all of these other people. And so it's very easy to cast it, well, he hasn't really brought about peace and he's not really about us, Africa, Burkina Faso being democracy. And is he really helping the people while you are doing other things behind to undermine what it is he's trying to do? Think about the fact of it. I'm never going to say, hey, it's a great idea that he got rid of all the political parties, so on and so forth. But
Right.
you're talking about how many people are in Burkina Faso, and there were 100 political parties?
Right.
Yeah.
So in other words, it became a form of grifting.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody, because you get into politics to make money. And hey, Trump and his regime knows that. You get into power so you can siphon all of the money that you can. Don't know if it's true or not, but apparently they're saying Stephen Miller has been able to pull out over $3.8 billion from the United States and has it, stored away somewhere else. And so when we read these kind of articles, Traore, please, I hope you do not go the way of Museveni, where you started off as a freedom fighter for our
Right.
people. Maybe, he certainly is making some very important strident steps right now to strengthen his country and their ability to trade, to bargain. But I hope in the process he doesn't get so drunk on power, because the
Correct.
other quote we know is that when power is completely unchecked, then that becomes problematic as well. So we still need checks and balances.
We do.
Last comment I'm going to make about democracies in Africa. In the kingdom of Opobo, which is where my descendants hail from, my ancestors, hail from. This past weekend, we just buried the previous Amayanabo, translated as King of Opobo. And although I don't think any book has been written where they gave Opobo Kingdom as an example of a democracy, that is really how that entity functions. I mean, up until now, where colonial powers and the federal government is inserting itself in other ways. But it used to be you had so many layers of power in terms of age groups who, quote unquote, governed themselves. And then you had the women elders and you had the male elders. You had chiefs who, when things couldn't be addressed at a certain level, it accelerated. And you had what we called Workino houses that determined who the next Amayanabo was going to be. So in terms of power by consent of the people, that actually existed. And our laws were created by us, and every human being, regardless of how much money they had or what title, had a pathway to get their issues addressed, grievances taken care of. Of course, now under this democracy that we have inherited or absorbed from the West, things don't quite work at that level anymore, because now there are other people over there, Amayanabo, who are determining what happens, the local government chairs and the governor and the president and so on and so forth. But African communities actually existed in the true sense of what we call democracies at one point. And it behooves us to go back and revisit that and to see, even with the world changing, how can we go back and pick up those tenets and rework them?
I
All right.
think,
So, I
I
just want to add something
you want to say
quickly before we move
Yeah.
to the next one. In terms of getting rid of the 100 political parties, I agree with Sister that could create problems, because you're creating now a lot of potential enemies who, of course, they're going to be targeted for bribes by the Western countries that want to undermine the revolution. So rather than just abolishing them by decree, I would have said, listen, we are fighting this existential battle against the jihadists. We need to all be on the same page. So right?
for
I'm
now.
asking you to voluntarily suspend your activities. So I'm declaring a national emergency so all of us can put our focus on fighting this insurgency. Once it's
The
over,
jihadists.
then we get back to political activities. You have to do it a bit strategically because now, you're creating people that are going to be easily bribed to undermine the revolution. So that is of major concern. And I just wanted to mention that Rodney also mentions, I think it was King Jaja of Opobo, who was renowned for
Yes.
resisting the slavers, until, of course, they crushed
Yeah.
and subdued them. So that's also in what Rodney's How Yoruba Developed Africa.
Africa, yeah. Also, when
Well, this was after he had first been an accomplice of
Right.
Queen
the
Elizabeth
British,
Correct.
by helping to crush
the Ashantis, yeah. So only came back to bite. In Democracy and Development in Africa by Claude Ake, he talked about the concept which Sister just alluded to now, that the African societies actually had a framework of how they govern themselves. But when the British came and the colonials came in, the first thing they did was harness everything to the center. And because they use violence in ensuring that they propagate their ideology, when they left, those framework were kept in place by whoever inherited them. And that has been the scraps everybody has been fighting over since to control. Because once they get in, we have classic examples: Cameroon, Zaire, Equatorial Guinea. Once you capture power, you're not going to let it go. And so maybe we have to find a way of, decolonizing our minds from this notion of what democracy truly is. And maybe this conversation should actually extend to the African continent to say, listen, let's come up with a framework of how we govern ourselves rather than this imposition since so-called flag independence. And so
that's a good book, by the way. That's a good book.
Flag independence. I love that.
That's a good book. I mean, actually, one of my biggest disappointments is how relatively unknown Claude Ake is. His
Claude
work,
Ake, yes.
he could be there on the same level with the Walter Rodneys. But for some reason, his book is not widely distributed. His legacy is not known. It's really a shame. But if you read his books, the 2 or 3 I've read, amazing. He was really, really up there.
Very on the money. Yeah, on the money when it comes to his analysis. So, for the next story, we go to the Financial Times, and it is that the proverbial cost of resource is about to hit, might be about to hit Kenya. And it's that Kenya has entered the rare earth race with Mirima's Hill deposit. Authorities seek intense competition from the US, China, and Australia for poster child projects. Kenya has invited expressions of interest in its prized deposit of rare earths at Mirima Hill, a test of whether the country can capitalize on intensifying interest in Africa's mineral resources to become a strategic supplier of critical minerals. Kenya's authorities hope the launch of competitive bidding will draw intense competition from the US, China, and Australia as the Trump administration seeks to counter Beijing's global dominance of rare earth metals used in high-performance magnets, defense and electronics industries, and build its own supply chains. Okay, so, look at that beautiful spot. You're going to dig this up. Yeah. Well, here's the part I want people to, I need people to actually look at. So the minister, the cabinet secretary for mines said, and I quote, "Let me assure you, it will not be extracted and exported in raw form. It will be processed in the country." Really? Okay, so rare earth niobiums are discovered in 1930 at the site located near the Indian Ocean, 65 kilometers from the port of Mombasa. Anglo-American later carried out drilling in the area. But the sad, go on. Let me get your take. How would you advise the Kenyans to go about this?
Well, obviously, first of all, and then I think there's another story that you're going to see the impact of the alliance of the Sahel states already. Kenya would not be talking like this that we want the minerals to be processed in Kenya. I did not wait for the example set by the Alliance of Sahel States, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso. And that is why it's even
Burkina Faso,
almost comical that is not mentioned in the previous article we discussed about Burkina Faso, right?
So, yeah.
But while that sounds encouraging, the two key missing things. Number one, I'm glad you showed that beautiful picture, right? All of that stands to be destroyed. And there's also the mention of the radioactive waste that comes from the mining. So the minister did not mention a single word about that. Hassan Ali Joho, the cabinet secretary for mines, he's saying something that he knows will get wide Pan-African support because this has already been popularized in West Africa. Processing. But there's something also missing even in the processing. We need processing and manufacturing. Processing means by the time you sell it, yeah, you're going to get more money for it because you've added value to it. But that's not the same as the next stage, which is manufacturing. You're creating more skilled jobs within your own country, which is what Alliance of Sahel States is trying to do. So the minister should not try to pull a fast one past us. Some of us pay attention to these things closely. And the glaring omission, not addressing the issue of the radioactive product, that to me is a very, very big concern. I hope the civil society in Kenya, because they're going to end up doing some deals. The estimate is what, $62 billion? There's no way they're going to leave that money. Even if you factor the cost of production, there's still billions of dollars to be made. So it's going to happen. So civil society in Kenya, whatever you need to do, you need to get involved. You need to become entrenched in the process. And many of them learned from ancestor Mazai, who taught us how to protest. You need to protest if need be to make sure that any deal, number one, does not translate into destroying all that beautiful scenery. It has to be controlled. If you can only exploit a certain percentage of it because you want to preserve the nature and environment, make sure that's what's done. Not just say, okay, we have 62 billion, let's tear everything down. No, that should not happen.
Sister.
I was thinking about a very wealthy person, has lots of grains, lots of animals, whatever. I'm going back to like an agrarian time frame. And they also have family, young ones growing, but they are flattered. They have visitors who come in and they just, maybe out of generosity, maybe out of, hey, I can get some money. I don't know, but they give. They allow these visitors access and they take as much as they want and they cart it off to go feed their own families and take care of their own needs. And then they build reserves over there. And now your children have grown or are growing and suddenly there's scarcity of food. Your barns have been decimated because you gave everything away and you don't have the means to reproduce.
Yeah.
When I think of what is happening in Africa, there's truly another scramble for Africa going on right now. At this point, we also have, unlike with the Berlin Conference, African accomplices who are sitting at the little kiddie table, but they're in the same room, and they're just saying, yeah, come and take, and here's the access, and here, we need your technology to tell us where we have more of our resources so you can extract more. Right. And we're going to get like absolutely nothing. And then what happens next? Because we're talking about Africa being the youngest continent. These minerals we're talking about, right, are needed for electric vehicles. They're needed for defense systems. They're needed for renewable energy. We see what Iran has been able to do when they were isolated and they just looked within. And they worked with what they had, got some technology, but they mined what they had and have been able to resist arguably toughest military on the on the earth, just in terms of their resources. What are Africans doing instead? What are our leaders doing instead? No long-term thinking here. I don't hear in this article where we're talking to our own engineers, to our own geologists, to our own agriculturists and saying, wait a second, Mrima Hill is a sacred forest. It is a biodiversity zone.
Yeah.
It is a cultural site for the Digo community. Any mining done here so that Elon Musk can, pilot his rocket ship to Mars and leave the rest of us here after they've devastated the earth,
Yeah.
is irreversible environmental and cultural loss. We talked about ants last week. Everything cannot be for sale all at the same time without any long-term thinking about what are we doing. 2 billion. Do you know how quickly 62 billion can be gone? How much has they run
the American
legal
actions
war against Iran? Well, how much has that cost already?
In 6 weeks.
And we can't get so excited about the little we can get now that we mortgage our entire future. And this is what indigenous people knew and used to practice, is that you are merely a custodian. You don't get to sell. You don't get to give away. You don't get to have these people come in and leave gaping holes in our landscape and then release all of these toxins in the process. And there's nothing to show for it. I want to just end with this really quickly. And thank you for bringing up Wangari Maathai, because this was her life's work and the life work of her mother who taught her, and so many other women who continue to fight, but who, like Jasmine Crockett, find out very quickly, and Kamala Harris and so many of us, that this patriarchy is a whole other level of poison where we will not listen to what women are saying, who, by the way, are directly impacted day to day by these decisions. But who is this person that they're quoting here? He has an MBA, I think, from some UK. Let's see it. He has a bachelor's degree in business administration, marketing, and an MBA from the University of Liverpool. He is a politician. Prior to becoming a politician, he was a businessman who was just into shipping and trade. What does he understand? Where are the experts who can really speak to what kind of, if you're going to do a deal, what that deal needs to consist of to protect the people and to protect the land? And so, Africans, let's get back to where we are using our own intelligence. There was an article I saw last week about a conference that we're having apparently in the UK that was supposed to be about African minerals. And maybe it was Ghana that pulled out the conference because it was all white people telling us what we should do and really no input from us. Brother Hassan Ali Joho, Pidgin English in Nigeria will say break. Put your brakes on. Let's get some people who really know what they're talking about around the table. And again, everything does not need to be for sale. And we definitely need to be conserving for our own future. Don't give these people minerals to build the very arsenal that they're going to use to enslave you.
Yep. Which have been doing for centuries.
Okay, correct. Yes. So before we go to the final story, if this is your first time here, do consider subscribing, joining the membership, subscribing to our Patreon. Every little helps. That said, let's go to our final story today, which comes from the German news outlets, Deutsche Welle. And it reads, EU seeks new strategy amidst Sahel influence rivalries. Following the 2022 to 2023 coups in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, the junta's regime turned to Russia, China, and even the US. Now, the EU wants to invest more in West African security and growth to forge closer ties. Between 2020 and 2023, the coups led to ruptures in foreign policy and to Europe's gradual withdrawal. Instead, Russia, China, and under Donald Trump, the United States also stepped up their presence and cooperation with the juntas. According to the study, European Sahel Policy, Back to Square One by the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, the study analyzes the situation in the Sahel and the EU options for action. To prevent further escalation in the region, Europe must, despite its limited influence, a new strategy, the study states. This is a code war for what, Comrade?
Well, they want to be on the table. This is Berlin Conference once again. And once the United States came back on board, of course, they said, hey, a fellow capitalist
It
is
focused the
dying.
attention.
We need to become involved as well. Previous to that, their strategy was no, you picked out the French. The French are the ones that have been helping you. And this paternalistic, nonsensical statement by Callas, who is the EU's person in charge of foreign affairs, we have been trying to help African countries because they are our neighbors. How condescending, how reactionary.
So glad you picked that up. How condescending.
So backward, so racist. You are helping Africans, these little children that need your help. But for some reason, with all the help you've been giving them, impoverishment has increased. Forced migration has increased, and your interdiction of them and rejection of them has increased. So unless you have a different definition of helping, I don't know what helping really means. But the main point in this article is, once again, they're taking the approach of the Alliance of Sahel States. So she's even talking now about, we want the wealth to remain in Africa. It's so comical. It's not comical, but it's so preposterous that it's comical. We want the wealth to remain in Africa. We want the processing to be done in Africa. Do you see a pattern here? Is this what we're hearing them say now in Kenya as well? So they realize that.
Yeah.
So here's the biggest thing, though, that is still missing. That there's still some African states who the people in those countries have not put enough pressure on them to take the signal from the Alliance of Sahel States and say, this is also our national policy. That's what we need to enforce in African countries. Any African government that is not subscribing to this policy, we need to help people in those countries remove those types of governments. We cannot be bystanders in the oppression of African people and say, we can't do anything about it. Of course we can. We just have to show the way. And the good example is already being set by the Alliance of Sahel States. Let's compel all those other governments to take the same approach. And then one other thing, the article talks about rupture in foreign policy. Rupture for whom? As if it's a mutual rupture, that this rupture was bad for both sides. Over to you, sister.
So if you go back to that article and they're talking about security, right, in Africa, again, I don't want to just take terms at face value. What are they referring to exactly?
Yes, security.
Who's security?
Absolutely.
If you protect Europe, you're by extension protecting Africa.
Okay. I just wanted to be sure that China and Russia and the US and France, all of them, they're just there because they care. They want to help us so much. They care so much about us as neighbors, which is why they have all these policies that they've either implemented or implementing to keep us away, which is why they've always traded unfairly with us, if you can use that word trade, which is why they fund conflicts in our countries, which is why they kill off our leaders.
Yep.
They did all of this because they were just trying to help us and improve security.
Absolutely.
Yes, security as in we want to ensure that we have unfettered access to your resources. Only security they're concerned about. We want to make sure that when we bring in our people to extract, or when we have to run our railways or the ports, or our planes need to come in and get out, that there's enough we don't care what's happening with you all. We just need to make sure we can get what we want out with minimal expense.
Right. Absolutely.
And let me tell you, just like slavery did not end based on their goodwill, getting these folk out of Africa is not going to end because they suddenly decide they want to acknowledge our common humanity. It's kind of hard to say. Nobody wants bloodshed, but we're not going to negotiate peace with these people because they don't even see your humanity.
Right.
And so even for Burkina Faso, and I understand that it's easy to talk behind this, microphone or whatever, but there are real realities on the ground until we're building our own weapons and things of that nature where we might feel we're dependent on them. But again, I would say Go and study what Iran has been able to do.
Yes,
They
that's the
invested in
blueprint.
education, and they brought their own minds together, and they started to resolve issues for themselves and to figure out how to protect themselves, and not just always feeling I'm at the mercy of someone deciding they want to help me. They are not trying to help you. Not today, not yesterday, not tomorrow.
But this is,
And the longer we play this deep, the more we just feed into this colonial mindset that actually weakens us.
yeah, this is a failure of leadership. I mean, I'm not recommending what type of government Nigeria should have. But can you imagine a Burkina Faso type or Thomas Sankara leadership in Nigeria, uninterrupted for 15 years, where Nigeria would be, with all the tens of thousands of engineers, doctors, scientists, physicists that Nigeria has spread all over the world right now? They could, of course,
All
do what
over the world.
they could accomplish what Iran has achieved within a very, very short time.
Yeah.
But it has to be a national policy, and the government needs to say, this is what we plan to accomplish in the next 10 years. And they would do it, you know. But you have a
And we can take
president
that.
who can't even walk. He can't walk unsupported, and he's the president of a powerful country like Nigeria.
Signing off on steel deals and all kinds of things to help workers in the UK. You know, again, even looking at what China was able to do, if the African continent said, you know what, isolate us if you will, and we're going to, what does any African nation need that is not already available on the continent?
Nothing.
Good leadership.
If we were able to come together, you guys want to isolate us, and we travel amongst ourselves, trade, build amongst ourselves, not what we're doing here with fighting each other and burning cars and all kinds of things because someone from a different country was made a traditional leader.
Yes.
But when it's
Insane.
Chinese or white people or other foreigners, you don't have a problem with that. It's all in our minds. But this, us talking here, hopefully plant some seeds. There are some young people that I am helping to put through university, and I send them books and I send them links to these conversations because many times they're not having these kind of conversations. And I want them to just think about, is there a different way to look at things? What is really hurting Africa is very limited imagination,
Right.
where imagination has been captured by the West, and we only see their ability to solve problems through their lens.
Yeah.
And we've got to take that lens off and recalibrate and really see that everything we need, we have. We just need to decide to come together and to do that work.
All right. So I'm glad you brought up China.
Comrade?
I'm glad you brought up China because, and I want people to go, listeners, go look this up, listeners and viewers. You can check World Bank stats or United Nations. I think they kept the same data as well. In 1960, the per capita income of China was $89. $89 per head for China. Ghana was 109. Think about that. Ghana's was more than double that of China. Of course, they went in different directions. China took control of its resources. China pushed literacy from like 13% to like 98 or 99%. And China started manufacturing. And these are the things that Africa needs to do as well.
Wow. Again, the conversations we have here stems on sovereignty and leverage. That's the running theme. It's constantly sovereignty and leverage. When you talk business, it's leverage. When you talk military strategy, it's sovereignty. And so we'll continue to have those conversations because we all know those African countries, 54 of them, are not really independent. They're masquerading as independent countries, but they're clearly not, because their actions lends itself to the conversation that it's not just happening. Again, I must thank Comrade, Sister, for taking time off their busy weekend and helping us to understand these stories and much more. Hopefully we'll continue to do the conversation, do this much more into the future. So final thoughts, Comrade?
I'll do to continue.
A fella would push back against that.
Until victory.
Sister?
until victory. But back to the points that I made at the very beginning. Don't sit on the sidelines of these elections. Please take one person along with you. Please give $5 to the candidate that you're supporting. Please be actively involved. This is not a spectator sport. And when we sit out, we all suffer, as we are clearly seeing.
And yes, and to continue the conversation on Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we're looking part of the series of Women in Resistance. We're going to be looking at La Mutre's Solitude, who she is, what she's about. Join us on Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and let's do that together. So until next week, it's good night and God bless. Good night.
Santi San.
That's a wrap for this week on the African News Review podcast. We hope you are leaving with a clearer, more truthful picture of Africa. Remember, every story has another side, and we're here to uncover it. Don't forget to join us next Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we continue to challenge the narratives and reclaim Africa's voice. If you've enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep seeing Africa for what it truly is.